Well, Dave, Julia, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We know it's been a pretty hectic day for you and it's much appreciated. You're going to be talking, or perhaps you could give us an idea of what issues you're going to be addressing today.
I'm going to hopefully give people the context of why it's so important to reduce transport emissions, because road transport emissions constitute around about 20% of the UK's CO2 emissions. So it's a big chunk that we have something to do something about. But it's also a big chunk where we have the ability to do something both very cheaply in terms of behaviour change and also more expensively but very effectively in terms of new technology.
It's a complicated, or from what I read into it, it's a complicated issue. Decarbonising transport is likely to be challenging, given that transport's greenhouse gas emissions have continued to increase in recent years.
It's particularly challenging because not only have we, more and more of us, bought cars, but we also drive further and further in those cars. There's been a gradual move, and in some areas an accelerating move, to use personal transport rather than to use public transport. So we've got the challenge of we've got to be more efficient citizens in terms of our carbon emissions. We've got to design more efficient cities to reduce our carbon emissions, and of course we need more efficient technology to reduce our carbon emissions. And it's a balance of those, but any one of those three on its own probably isn't enough.
Well, that's it. It's got to be an overall concerted effort, hasn't it? It can't just be one and not the other.
Yes, absolutely. We've got to manage to do all of them. And of course, obviously, the more we can encourage people out of their cars and onto really efficient public transport, the better. But that will be difficult. People have lots of reasons, several children to take with them or whatever, when that we do need the personal transport as well. And we've got to make sure we encourage people to do it, because we can't force them to do it.
Obviously, road vehicles, as you mentioned there, have got shorter lifespan, trains, boats, planes. So therefore, obviously, the technology for them can be adapted by 2050. But with the others, it's a long-term project. It's got to be taken into account that those things don't happen overnight, as they can do with cars.
Yes, and of course it's not overnight with cars. I mean, cars have lives of 12, 13 years, and actually the evidence is that those are getting longer. And we know, of course, that the paintwork on cars now lasts far longer than it did when you and I were young. So cars are lasting longer. So actually, even with cars, the turnover rate is not so fast. But of course, with airplanes, you can be flying in a design that's 30 or 40 years old, and it can be extremely safe and very sensible. But of course, in terms of reducing CO2 emissions, that rate of turnover of technology is very, very slow and very expensive.
Yeah, of course. At grassroots level then, what more can organisations do to encourage green travel?
I think there's a lot organisations to do, and of course especially large organisations. You have a lot of people travelling to work. There are all sorts of basic things about making sure that finding out about public transport is easy, making sure that, for example, the bus stops around your organisation have shelter, are in nice places, so that when people are going home from work in winter and it's dark, they're not on lonely streets where they could feel kind of uncomfortable or slightly threatened even. Just the small things, making sure that you have screens in your buildings that show people when the next bus is leaving. So if the weather's bad, they don't actually have to leave shelter until the last minute to go and get the bus or whatever. All those things just do make it easier for people to use public transport. And in implementing those sorts of things, we've seen quite a significant drop in car usage at Aston University and an increase in use of public transport for people commuting to work. So
you've actually seen a drop in the research that you guys have done because of those the implementations that you put in place?
Yes, we've doubled the proportion of people cycling to work, and we've reduced from I think about 56% down to about 37% the number of people who come to work in their car. So we're really pleased with that. Of course, we've been doing this for 4 years. In the first 2 years, we saw a big drop. Last year, last time we did the survey, we saw a much gentler drop. We're about to do our survey again, so we now need some new initiatives to keep driving that down. And one of the things we've done is we have increased the cost of car parking on site at the university, but at the same time, we've reduced the number of spaces available so that people couldn't say, this is the university trying to make money out of me. We're trying to say this isn't something, we're not trying to penalise you. We genuinely are trying to change the way we behave.
Right. Well, there's been a big focus, and you mentioned vehicles there, but there's been a big focus on electric vehicles, but it seems there's a reluctance to the UK public, certainly, to convert. Do we do enough in the UK to promote electric vehicles?
think we have some quite good schemes, and I've been, impressed that despite all of the pressures, this government has stuck to the commitment to provide the £5,000 subsidy for purchasers of ultra-low carbon vehicles, including electric vehicles. I mean, that's been tough given the other pressures we've had around us. We do need to see more public charging infrastructure to reassure people that they won't get stuck, and we do need more opportunities for people to find out what driving an electric vehicle would be like. But I also think we need some really significant investment in new business models. So the idea that you buy the car, but perhaps you rent the battery, so that we take that big additional upfront cost that the battery adds to the vehicle away from the consumer. And I'm hoping, of course, that things like the BMW i3, a really iconic, upmarket, kind of aspirational electric car, will help. But the challenge there is, of course, that where that's likely to help is going to be in big cities like London, where we have a kind of young affluent population in very good jobs. And of course, that means we have to take on the challenge of how are those people going to be able to park and charge their vehicles.
Exactly. Finally then, we're encouraged to leave the car at home, as you mentioned there, because of the car park that you've done, because of the high emissions. But the cost of public transport is probably the main reason why we don't, as well as obviously, like you said, children and taking other things. Could travel costs be cut to encourage public transport?
I would love to see that. Yes, I think, and I think it would be good to see things like the carbon price underpin, the taxes that are being collected from things like that being used to help consumers to behave in a greener way. And that's where we should be putting those sorts of revenues.
So we're going in the right direction, but still a long way to go.
Still a long way to go, but there's plenty of opportunity and we can do it.
Fantastic. Thank you for your time.